Hello dear viewers, today you will watch 3 scary stories. I lived way out in the country when I was 15 years old. So way out, it would take us an hour to the closest grocery store, and it would take the cops 45 minutes to get to our house. No neighbors close by. If something happened, no one would hear you scream. One night, I got a good feeling in my stomach that something wasn't right. I ignored it and went to sleep, thinking it was just anxiety. Then, I wake up to a blood-curdling scream at 2 in the morning. I was absolutely terrified. These screams were demonic, switching between a high-pitched screech of a woman to a growl of a man. My entire family woke up, and my stepdad got his shotgun. My stepdad went outside. Mind you, this is the country, and there are no street lights. It is pitch black other than the porch light above us. The screaming and screeching continues. It sounds like 2 people. My sister had gone out with her boyfriend earlier that day and still hadn't returned. Based off the screaming, my mom thought my sister was being murdered in the woods by her then boyfriend. My mom started screaming, "Jason, fake name. Jason, you let go of her. Get your hands off her. Where are you?" Then it goes absolutely silent. We're so scared thinking she's dead and he's coming for us next. Then another noise begins, and it's the voice of a man/demon. He yells, "I am Jacob. I am the Son of God. I am chosen to find the baby. Only I can make this passage. Only I can find this baby in Valine." Now we're really scared thinking my sister's boyfriend is part of a cult and going to kill us all. My mom finally calls the police, all the while this person is screeching and howling and creeping closer and closer to our house. After about 30 minutes of this, we finally see the outline of a person in our field of vision, right next to our car. My stepdad shoots near. Yells, "Don't you get any closer now." Person creeps closer, stepdad shoots closer. "Now don't make me kill you," he yells. With that second shot, we hear the person run back up the woods, and we wait for the police to arrive. Finally, after 45 minutes, the police car comes through and shines light on the perpetrator. We cannot believe what we see. It is a skinny, completely naked, shaved head man, crawling on all 4s like a gorilla. Or like Gollum from LOTR, if that's easier to picture. The police grab him screeching and howling the entire time. The cops didn't even come down to explain what was happening. They just took off, and we had to go back to sleep like nothing happened. The next day, we had to call the police to find out what happened and who this was. Apparently, this was one of our neighbors, who was a repeat offender. Our neighbor mixed a bunch of together and tripped out a little too hard. It was actually unfortunate to hear he succumbed to his addictions a couple of years later. He was very young. This was a terrifying night, and for those that don't live in the country, this is the true horrors we have to face. Unemployment and alcohol addictions and domestic abuse. These issues can run rampant in rural areas, and I hope our areas will get better one day. TLDR, a demon/man showed up screeching at our house in the country. He stated he was the Son of God and came to find a baby. Police arrive. It was a man all tripped out on many different substances. We need to be more aware of the problem in rural areas. Behind my house was miles of woods until they chopped it down for a neighborhood. 20 feet behind my house is a steep drop-off or a mild cliff into a valley with a creek in it. Very steep on both sides. So this valley has been left as forest in between neighborhoods. When I was little, we saw all kinds of wildlife in our yard. We stopped seeing turkeys completely and less deer after the new neighborhood. Tons of rabies too, until the bigger animals stopped coming around. This is all backstory. I only let one dog out to pee in the backyard on a leash because she can escape anything given time, while the other is chained to a runner that runs the length of the yard, but she is a good girl and doesn't need supervision. So at night it has always been creepy to walk out to the edge of the woods just so the dog can pee. Last summer my sister and I kept hearing something over the hill and felt like we were being watched. The motion sensor light in our yard was always on by the time went outside too. We both thought we were being paranoid, so we didn't tell the ether our thoughts. Eventually I broke Dawson and told her we were being watched from over the hill, and she said she FSLT the same way. We both agreed the presence felt negative and angry. We started taking the dogs out with bats and knives and pepper spray. We could not figure out what was watching us. Whatever it was got bolder and bolder. We started to hear it more frequently. By the way it sounded, we both estimated its size as at least that of a large dog. Sometimes we heard a grunt or two. This only happened at night. The dogs would silently whip their heads towards the sounds and just watch. Normally they bark at that kind of stuff. I was glad though, because one dog is 12 and needs a leg brace to walk, while the escaping one is a Chihuahua mix, so if they started a fight they would lose. This went on for weeks. It started that we felt like we were being watched in the daytime too. We even started to hear sounds at day. We never once thought this presence felt human. There are coyotes in the area. There are bears too, but they are so rare they make the news when sighted. Mountain lions are extinct in my area, so it was possible that some found their way back to this territory, but it was unlikely. One day I am letting the dogs out, but I am not too on guard as daytime visits were still much rarer. Then I hear a large object moving through the brush and a grunt. My stomach drops. That was the closest I ever heard it. I pick up my dog as slowly as possible and start to turn towards the house to evacuate when I catch sight of a herd of 5 or 6 deer on the cliff staring me down. They look downright murderous. I have seen deer my whole life, but I never saw one look so angry. It had been in the news a year before that a single deer killed someone nearby. They were dumb and didn't respect the deer's space. My house was stalked by a herd of deer for weeks, lol. My family throws expired produce out of the back door over the cliff. The yard is shallow and you can make the throw from inside to avoid compostable materials sitting in a landfill. That's why the deer were hanging out. We had a buffet for them. We stopped that real quick and they only hung around for a few more days. It might sound dumb that we never put this behavior together with the visitor, but we had done that our whole lives and forgot about it the moment it was launched over the hill. The end result was pretty funny, but the build-up was creepy TLDR. My sister and I feel like we are being stalked by an animal every night. After weeks of the stalker getting bolder and closer, we realized it was just an angry herd of deer, lol. I grew up in ruralish Illinois, but while I was 16 was house-sitting for my aunt and uncle in the middle of nowhere Illinois, about an hour and a half away from anyone I knew. Which was dumb of me because I was such an anxious kid, but they were paying me $300. I had all the blinds and curtains tightly closed, so I wasn't creeped out by the desolate location, corn, as far as the eye could see. Around dusk I was nearly positive I heard the back door jiggle, but convinced myself I had imagined it. I was popping popcorn, so I blamed it on that. An hour or so later I heard very distinct whimpering outside. At first I thought it was one of their cats, but then I realized it was more human/childlike. I started peeking through blinds and didn't see anything. At that point I called my dad to try and get him to come out and stay with me. When I accepted the gig he warned me that he wouldn't come to my rescue. I got too scared, so he told me I was psyching myself out and that I was safe. It wasn't long, though, before the whimpers turned into actual human cries, and to me it sounded like a little kid. I put on my brave pants and opened the sliding glass door blinds to see that a girl was lying on the patio furniture crying. I quickly unlocked the door and flung it open, but as soon as she heard me she jumped up and started banshee screaming while looking me dead in the eye. It turned out that she wasn't a girl, it was a grown, but petite, woman, maybe in her 50s, just staring at me and screaming at the top of her lungs. Obviously, I slammed the door shut again and locked it and sprinted into the kitchen to call the cops. This was before teenagers had cell phones, so I was relying on the landline. During that call she began violently banging on the sliding glass door. I decided to hide in a lower kitchen cabinet, lol, dumb hiding spot. In case she got in, it was going to be a bit of a wait because the police station was about 30-ish minutes out. I had about 1 million anxiety attacks in that time, but after a few minutes the banging had stopped and it was dead quiet. I also called my dad back and had him on the line while he drove. He was an early adopter of the cell phone, thank goodness, because the 911 operator said they couldn't let me tie up their lines and stay on the call with them until the cops arrived. A very lazy, disinterested police officer finally showed up, did a 5-minute sweep of the property before saying there was no threat. Mind you, this was a massive farm operation with half a dozen outbuildings, a few sheds, acres of corn, and endless opportunities to hide. And this man took a single lap around the house, half-heartedly pointing his flashlight around. Luckily, he did agree to stay with me until my dad arrived. My dad showed up and told me to go to sleep, and he sat on the patio with a shotgun until sunrise. The next day, my dad and I, and his shotgun, poked around the property and found evidence that someone had been staying in a storage shed, but no sign of the woman. And there was no sign of the woman ever again after that. If it weren't for her little hidey hole in the shed, I almost feel like people would have thought I imagined it. This experience actually caused a huge falling out between my dad and his sister because they needed me there as a house sitter to feed the cats and keep an eye on the chickens, but it later came out that they had a feeling that somebody had been nosing around their home and that's why they wanted a house sitter. They never found the woman. There was zero evidence that she was doing on the property. That was our initial assumption, and she could have been, just nothing to point to that in the shed. She was about 4 miles from the nearest home and 30 miles from town, aka a gas station, grocery store, and church, so they were unsure how she even got there in the first place. She absolutely terrified me, and I had literal trauma afterwards and couldn't be alone, but I feel horrible for her because I can't begin to imagine the circumstances that led her to that night, and I worry about where she went afterward.